Turkish officials say they are widening their investigation into the disappearance of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The Washington Post columnist and frequent critic of the Saudi government was last seen more than 2 weeks ago after entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Reports say he was dismembered alive and beheaded. Saudi officials have denied having knowledge of his disappearance, but on Thursday, President Trump's tone on the situation shifted. CBS News White House correspondent Weijia Jiang has the latest.
In his strongest remarks to date, President Trump said it appears missing Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi is dead.
It certainly looks that way to me. It's very sad.
On his way to Montana, the president said the Saudis will face serious consequences if implicated.
It'll have to be very severe. I mean, it's bad stuff.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, scheduled to attend a financial summit in Saudi Arabia next week, pulled out. Writing on Twitter, just met with President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and we have decided I will not be participating. Pompeo, who traveled to Saudi Arabia and Turkey earlier this week, briefed the president on the ongoing investigations.
I told President Trump this morning that we ought to give them a few more days to complete that so that we, too, have a complete understanding of the facts surrounding that.
In Istanbul, investigators expanded their search, entering the consulate for the second time today, as well as the Saudi consul's residence. They're also reportedly searching a large forest in the city. Turkish media claims this surveillance photo could be a key piece of the puzzle, identifying the man as Maher Abdulaziz Mutreb, an intelligence officer in Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's inner circle. Khashoggi, a critic of the Crown Prince, entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October 2nd and has not been seen since. Mutreb entered the building just before Khashoggi. The Saudis have denied knowing anything about his disappearance, but a State Department official tells CBS News Saudi Arabia lied and feels cornered. The king might not have known, but his son, the Crown Prince, did. The administration's close relationship with the prince has complicated their response to the alleged murder. The U.S. counts Saudi Arabia as a key ally in the effort to counter Iran, and it is the top buyer of U.S. arms. President Trump has been reluctant to let this episode harm the relationship. Speaking on CBSN last year, Khashoggi warned the Trump administration's embrace of Mohammed bin Salman could backfire.
It is dangerous. It is dangerous for Saudi Arabia, for the region.
And Weijia Jiang joins me now from the White House. Weijia, the president said the consequences should be severe if the Saudis are found to be responsible. Is the administration saying exactly what those consequences might be?
Well, that is the natural follow-up question, and today President Trump did not answer it, only using that word, saying they will be severe. But of course, we've been asking him about this for days, and one thing he has made very clear is what he does not prefer in terms of a potential penalty, and that is ditching an arms sale to Saudi Arabia that he says is worth $110 billion. He says that Saudi Arabia will simply buy their equipment from China or Russia, and that really Americans would be the ones losing out, and that he believes there are several other ways to penalize them. But to answer the question, no, he has not offered up options. He has not revealed what he might be thinking in terms of consequences, because he and the rest of the administration, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, have been so cautious to say, you know what, we're not even going to talk about that until we have the results of the investigation, because we don't know if they have done anything wrong at this point. In fact, just today, the secretary said we'll have to wait for those results before we decide if and how we proceed with consequences.
Well, speaking of the results of an investigation, how is the White House then responding to criticism that the Saudis cannot be trusted to conduct an honest investigation?
And that is another question that we keep pressing them about, because essentially they are investigating themselves. And Secretary of State Pompeo said many times that, the king and the crown prince have given given him their word that they are committed to a complete and thorough investigation, and they promise that they will be transparent in the process and give up all of their results, whatever it is they find. The problem here is that so many days passed before they launched this investigation. There are reports coming out of Turkish media outlets that evidence was destroyed. Walls were covered up. The floors were cleaned. And, that's just one of many storylines coming out of Turkish state media reports about, what has been done to potentially cover up this disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi. And by the way, sources confirmed to CBS News that Saudi Arabia is prepared to release some sort of statement to acknowledge that this was an interrogation gone wrong.
Right.
So there is guilt there, but certainly that's very different from planning and executing a murder.
And even if it was an interrogation gone wrong, where is Khashoggi's body? What was done with it? I mean, all of those would be the natural follow-up questions.
Yeah. Precisely. And so those are the answers that we are waiting for. Sources tell CBS News that the results of the investigation should be made public by the end of the week, that it's wrapping up, because Secretary Pompeo has put pressure on them and has said, look, you're running out of time. We need some answers. But the credibility of those answers, the quality of those answers, I think will remain in doubt because of the way all of this played out.
Well, it's also clear that, what the president wants to happen and what Congress wants to happen might not align here. So what sorts of actions do lawmakers say they would like the president to take? And is there a likelihood they will take action on their own?
Well, they could take action based on the findings. And of course, the results will be shared, presumably with Congress, and they'll be able to decide whether they want to take action themselves to, for example, block that arms sale or restrict American assistance for the Saudi operation in Yemen. But, what's interesting is they have to walk a fine line, too, because they acknowledge, at least in terms of the Republican Party, they acknowledge that this investigation has not wrapped up. We do not know, because the president refused to answer, whether the FBI was sent there, whether other law enforcement officials from the U.S. is involved in investigating as well. And so they have to wait to be sure that Saudi Arabia is implicated before demanding action.
Right.
But they are having issue already with the soft stance that the president seems to be taking, focusing more on how important of an ally financially and politically Saudi Arabia is, rather than talk about the fact that this could be potentially very serious and they could face consequences, which, by the way, today the president used the toughest language, I believe, to date to talk about this because of that increasing pressure that I think he's finally feeling. Right. Democrats, on the other hand, believe that he's letting Saudi Arabia get away with murder because they think there's already enough to implicate them, and that he should be doing something, perhaps sanctioning them or delivering other strong messages, rather than, again, saying we're just going to wait until they turn over the results of their own investigation.
Right. Now, WEJA Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin tweeted that he will not be attending a conference in Saudi Arabia next week. Do we know how that decision was made, and what message does that send to the Saudis, as well as all the other countries watching this situation unfold?
Well, when you look at everything that's unfolding around this conference and the fact that this investigation has not been wrapped up, that Secretary Pompeo returned to the U.S. without concrete answers, that there is this mounting pressure. Secretary Mnuchin himself said it was after he met with both Pompeo and the president that they all came to this conclusion that he was not going to participate. And so that could signal that the U.S. is actually prepared to back away at least a bit from these financial luxuries that Saudi Arabia provides, because they do pump a lot of money into the U.S.
Right.
And this is such a tremendous financial summit that, is meant to sort of reaffirm that financial relationship between Saudi Arabia and the U.S., and for him to say I'm not going does send a message. But it also is the result of many other media companies, executives, and journalists who pulled out first. You know, they started pulling out last week, and Mnuchin was firm and said, I haven't decided yet, but I'm for now planning to go. So here we are in another week without answers, with mounting pressure, and I think they really felt that, and he had to say, I'm not going.
The U.S. was not leading the charge here, but rather bringing up the rear. Weijia Jiang, thank you for your reporting from the White House.
Sure. Thanks.